Welcome to Living the Reclaimed Life podcast. I'm Denisha. We're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. I had the privilege of being interviewed by Claire Culwell on her podcast, Called to Be Bold. And before I share the interview, I want to tell you a little about Claire. Claire is a twin abortion survivor. What that means is her mom was pregnant with her and her twin and chose to have an abortion. The abortion took the life of her twin, yet she survived. Claire was then adopted into a loving family and says that finding out that she survived an abortion never changed who she knew she was, wanted, chosen, and loved. Claire met her birth mother in 2009 who told her about her survival. Claire shares a hopeful message of forgiveness, redemption, and truth, exposing the humanity of the unborn baby and how abortion hurts women. She is an internationally known pro-life speaker and author. She's been featured on Fox News, Focus on the Family, and many other media outlets. Claire has recently written a book called Survivor, where she shares her story. And friends, it is hot off the press. It is available on Amazon, and you can find the link to the book in the show notes. You can also find her website and several other fantastic organizations that she and I talk about in this episode, including the Abortion Survivors Network, which is so close to our hearts. Be sure to check out the show notes, and we hope that you enjoy our conversation today. Welcome to Called to Be Bold with Claire Culwell. I'm Claire, your host. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a mini-series called Meet Survivors that I am doing leading up to the release of my book called Survivor that releases to bookstores on April 27th. Really excited about that, but I am even more excited today that I get to introduce you to another abortion survivor. If you haven't been listening, I would be sure to go back and listen to the 3 episodes before this of this mini series called Meet Survivors, where I highlight other abortion survivors like me who I have met and become friends with over the past really couple years. And so it's been really encouraging to hear from them, and especially for me to know that I'm not alone, that there are people who have experienced what I've experienced, but also for you as a listener to be able to humanize that unborn baby and see that there are not just Claire Culwell and Gianna Justin and Melissa Oden out there, but there are other survivors who share a similar story, who survived an abortion procedure, and that their stories matter just as much as mine, just as much as yours. So today, I'm so excited to introduce y'all to Denisha Werkheiser. She is the founder of Reclaimed Story, which is a ministry for women to bring hope and healing to their story, to what they have experienced in their past, to their circumstances. And so I'm excited for y'all to hear from her. Welcome, Denisha. Thanks so much for joining us. Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Denisha, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, well, I live in Tucson, Arizona in the desert, and it's really beautiful if you've never seen the desert. I live in Tucson with my husband and 3 kids. This year we have bookend kids. So we have a freshman, a senior, and then a 9-year-old. So it's been a crazy year for them. But yeah, we have 3 kids, live in Tucson. And I just want to say thank you so much, Claire, for all you're doing. You are such a trailblazer along with Melissa and Gianna. And it's just amazing to just get to know you and be a part of all that is sort of coming out during this time.
Thank you so much. Well, what is your survivor story? People ask me all the time, how does someone survive an abortion procedure? And I know my story. I was a twin, and I survived a D&E abortion procedure, but I'm curious, what is your survivor story? How did you become an abortion survivor?
I was 42, and my husband and I were talking about the New York law, the Reproductive Act that came through. And I was really upset about that. And I said, this isn't okay. And as we're processing that, the thought popped in my head, ask your dad if your mom ever considered having an abortion with you. And I thought that's kind of an interesting thought. I was born in the 70s, so abortion was legal. And so I kind of, pushed it aside, and we went on with our conversation. And then the next thing, it popped in my head again. And I thought, okay, it was like an urgency I felt. So I texted my biological dad. My mom has been passed away for decades now. And I texted my biological dad and I said, hey, I have a question for you. I have a weird question for you. I said, did mom ever consider having an abortion with me? And I'm thinking he's going to say yes, but, of course she didn't. And, we raised you. And about 2 hours later, my text went off and my dad said, oh, you don't know, do you? He says, not only did your mom consider having one, he said, we tried. She had an abortion with you. And I remember I was sitting in Culver's actually, and I had a concrete mixer in one hand and like fries or cheese curds in the other hand. And I just sat down and I felt like all the blood had rushed out of my body. I was just in shock. And I looked at my husband and I thought, well, this was all great information until he said that. And I just stared at my phone and I thought, is this even a thing? Do people, I actually survived an abortion. I just wanted to know, did she consider it? I don't know why, it just kept popping in my head. And so I found out later that day that my mom and dad found out they were pregnant with me in October. And in November, my mom took what was an off the market version of the abortion pill that's legal today. So she took 4 white pills to end the pregnancy in November. She was early in the pregnancy at that point. And in December, she was still pregnant. So that did not work. So she went into the hospital in California and she had a full D&C abortion. And after the procedure, January rolls around, February rolls around, and she realizes that she's still pregnant. And at this point in California, back in the, later 70s, to have an abortion that far along was illegal. So in February, she realized I'm having this baby. And so my parents, they got married in April. And then in July, I was born full term. So that it's crazy to think about just how did all of that happen? How did the pills not work? Just all of that story to kind of take that in on that day a couple of years ago was a lot.
Wow, I didn't realize that you found out so recently and by text message of all ways to find out something so, earth-shattering information about your birth, but also just finding out that maybe what you believed about yourself wasn't necessarily the case. And I can relate to that. I remember the moment that I found out and sat face to face with my birth mother and learned that I had survived an abortion and that I had been a twin. And just navigating something like that is so, I don't know, you can feel so alone, so rejected. How did it affect you? You shared how it felt in that moment, but as you went home and you told, your family and your friends, and then eventually now you're sharing your story through Reclaimed Story and through the Abortion Survivors Network and providing healing and hope to so many other women and families who have difficult stories, difficult past, difficult realities that maybe they didn't know were true about themselves, that then they found out something earth-shattering like you did. So how did it affect you over the following weeks and months and years?
Well, I think the first thought that hit me was, what's real? what's true about my life? Like I sitting in that moment and in processing over the next few weeks, the first thing I thought was like, what was real in my life? What else do I know? Do I believe one way, but is really another? Like I thought I was, wanted and loved. And I was, my mom and dad would refer to me as the miracle baby. And my dad said, that's why, honey, because we attempted to end your life twice and you were a miracle. And I thought, I just thought I was a miracle. Like all babies are miracles, right? And so I think having that narrative my whole life, like, oh, I'm a miracle. My parents loved me. And then finding out what was really true, just really, and you nailed it with rejection, the feeling of just rejection and a little bit, even though I wasn't abandoned, I felt like a little bit of abandonment, like, wow, what if it had worked? I think the ripple effect just started playing out in my head and I couldn't shut it off for the next couple of weeks. What if it had worked? I'm looking at my 3 children thinking they wouldn't be here if I wasn't here. What would, life, like I could potentially not have a life at all. And that, I think just that whole reality, there were so many layers that God was kind of just pulling off at the time. And it was a lot to process. I was positive that I was the only one. That's why you guys being trailblazers and sharing your story so courageously is so important, because I was positive I was the only one. And I remember one night sitting down at my computer and I remember it took a lot of courage because I was sure I was going to get all of these articles about how, no, this never happens. This isn't a thing. Survivors don't exist. And I typed in, do people survive abortions? And that's when I found the Abortion Survivors Network and found your story. And I was like, oh, I'm not alone. And that was huge.
That's why so many of us share our stories so that people don't have to feel alone. And even bigger than us not being alone and sharing our birth circumstances with each other, I hope that people hear that they're not alone because God is with them in the depths of disparity and the moments that are scary and uncertain and feel so unfair, which, I would say is the story of an abortion survivor. Nobody thinks they'll find something like that out one day about themselves. And when they do, it's definitely hard, but I hope that people know that God will make a way, and God is with us, and he wants to make something good out of something that was meant for evil. Something that struck me that you said is what your parents said to you. Your life is a miracle. And I vividly remember sitting across from my birth mother, and as she was crying and telling me her story, which is my story as well, that her deepest pain, something that she had not shared with anyone, she just kept saying, Claire, your life is a miracle. Your life is a miracle. I'm so sorry, but your life is a miracle. And in that moment, as I heard that, I had a choice to either be angry and just sit in my despair, kind of, which, I'm human. I've done that some. But I had a choice whether I heard her words of, your life is a miracle. And when she said that, what I heard was, God has a plan. This isn't an accident. His fingerprints are written all over your life. You can look back on your life and see that God has always been faithful, and he's always turned what was meant for harm, what was meant for evil, into something that's good. And so I'm curious, was there hope in that moment as well? As you found out that you survived an abortion, as you found out that you were rejected twice, not once, but twice, was there hope? And if there was, what did that look like for you?
Well, the day that I found out, I had started Reclaimed Story. It started off as a blog. Um, and I knew that it was going to end up being a ministry one day. I knew that it was going to grow, and I didn't have full vision for it. But my prayer, we had launched the blog the very month that I found out my survivor story. And over those 2 weeks between the two dates, I was praying, God, what do you want me to stand for? What do you want us to stand for with Reclaim Story? Obviously, we're going to stand for Christ, but I thought, what are we going to stand for? Are we going to get involved in freeing people from sex trafficking? Are we going to get involved with saving babies? What are we going to stand for? And that was my constant prayer. I had a prayer team praying for me. And so the day that I found out, the first thing that I thought was, my hope was, this is what I'm going to stand for. Because having a thought pop in my head, ask your dad if your mom ever considered having an abortion with you. I really believe, Claire, that was God, because I didn't want to know that. To be honest, I really didn't want to know this. And it's not a club that you want to be in. It's not something that you're looking forward to. Oh, I hope I find out that I survived, an attempt on my life. And so the hope for me was that God had a plan, exactly what you said. I remember we were at a hotel the day that I found out, and we were shopping and going to Culver's. And I remember sitting there, and the first thing I thought was, at first I was upset, and I thought, God, why would you reveal this to me? Why did I need to know this at 42? I have a whole lot of things I'm processing in my life, which is what led me to start Reclaim Story. But why do I need to know this? And the first thing I remembered was, you've been praying, what are you going to stand for? God, what are we going to stand for as a ministry? And so I knew at that moment, my hope was that I didn't understand my story fully, but that I knew God had a plan for my story in this season in culture. And so I think that really brought me hope. And it took a lot of wrestling to get there. I'm not going to say I was like, oh, I am a survivor, I am going to use this for good. But the first thought, after I wrestled with my emotions, it was a hope of going, God didn't reveal this to hurt me. God revealed this to do something in it and through it. And I'm not my experience. And so that brought me a lot of hope.
It gives me goosebumps just hearing you say that prayer that you'd been praying. What are you going to stand for? And then to see how God has been able to use your story. And I've only been able to see a little bit of how God has used you and your willingness to speak up and to serve and to be a part of the healing for so many people through the Abortion Survivors Network. And I know that you're also doing that through Reclaim Story. And it kind of, your prayer kind of leads into my next question of, what do you want people to know about abortion survivors? I mean, when you were asking God, what do you want me to stand for? Like you said, your intent was never to ask God, like, make me an abortion survivor and give me this platform to stand on truth. But he did that. He picked you. In fact, I look at it as an honor of a lifetime to be a survivor, and that God chose me and chose you and chose other friends of ours who are survivors to be able to speak truth and to stand on truth and to act on that prayer that you prayed. What are we going to stand for? And so I think that a lot of times people can see the importance of standing for truth, specifically on the life issue, through the abortion survivor. And so I want to know, what do you want people to know about abortion survivors, and how can that motivate them to stand for something that truly matters?
That is such a great question. I would love people to know about survivors that we're not different than them. That, even as you're listening, like, you might think, that's not my story. I'm not a survivor. And our stories are really like, whoa, right? I remember as I've shared with people my story, I've had some people say, wait, is that a thing? What I would love people to know, even though that sounds so far out, right? We are not any different than anyone else that has experienced something hard in their lives. And so I think as far as survivors, I hope that our faces and our stories humanize the unborn. I hope we can look at us and go, wow, you were once there. You were once, in the womb with an attempt on your life. But I hope they can look at us and see us as people who love, who care, who have experienced something hard in our life, and that there's not that much distance between your stories and our stories. Because if we boil off the experience we had, right, our experience includes surviving an abortion. But other people have experiences of abuse, of grief and loss, of, hard childhoods, neglect. And when you take all of those experiences and you boil off the top, right? We boil off the details of our stories. What we have left in the pot is the same emotions. We wrestle with our identity, who we are in Christ, our worthiness. Are we worthy? We wrestle with rejection. We wrestle with, sadness and all of these things. We need hope and we need healing, just like anybody else that's had something hard happen in their story. We're using our stories for good, just like everybody has the opportunity to do that.
What has the response been like as you've shared your story with other people, maybe people at your church or people in your family, or even just in general in this culture that we live in today? What's the response been like?
The response is shock. Every time. If I had $1 for every time somebody said, "Is that a thing?" I'm like, yes, it is totally a thing. And I have so many friends. I know over 360 people who it's a thing. And so I think, it's shock. In fact, it's interesting. I had shared my story with one gal, and a couple months later talked to her again. And she said, "Wait, you mean you survived your mom? Like you were the one in the womb?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "I always thought you were sharing with me that you had an abortion that you survived." And so that's so interesting. So I've learned to say that I've survived my mom's failed abortion. So I just think it's so unknown that we're bringing a voice to something that hasn't been out there for the public to hear, that people survive abortions. This is something that happens. And so I think that there is shock and it needs a lot of clarity at times. When I had the opportunity, I had a gal call me and she said, "Hi there." I didn't know her. She'd connected. My friend had she'd given her my number. And she said, "Hi there." She says, "I understand you know a lot about abortions." And I kind of sat down because I didn't expect that, hello, 2:00 in the afternoon. And she said, "I understand you know a lot about abortions." And I thought, okay, the first thing that hit me is, okay, Lord, guide my words. And I said, I do actually. And I said, "What's your name? And I'm so glad that you called me." And she said, she shared that she was pregnant and she was trying to decide on what type of abortion to have. And get this, she was trying to decide over taking the abortion pill or having the abortion procedure. I said, "I'm so glad that you called me and that you're doing your research before making a decision. Why don't you tell me a little bit about where you are in life and how are you? How'd you find yourself, in this situation? What's causing you to consider, an abortion?" And she shared her story and we just had a very honest, loving conversation. And I said, "I'm so glad that you shared that. This must be really hard, And I said, "Do you mind?" We were about 45 minutes into the conversation. And I said, "Do you mind if I share with you my story?" And she said, "Absolutely, please." And so I said, "It's interesting that when we first talked that you asked if, you were asking me between the abortion pill or having a procedure." And I said, "I'm going to say something that might shock you a little bit." I said, "Here's what's interesting." I said, "My mom experienced both." And she said, "Oh." And I said, "So I do know a lot about this." I said, "The interesting thing in my story is that I am the baby that she tried to abort." And there was this long pause. And I said, I know that's a little shocking. And I did tell her in the very beginning, I said, my hope for you is that you choose life, but I will walk with you through this choice. I will walk with you. I'm so glad that we connected. And so when I shared that with her, we processed for a little bit, and then she just suddenly stopped and she started to cry. And she said, you're like my baby. And I said, you know what, friend, I am. And I said, but you have an opportunity to make a different choice for your baby than my mom chose for me.
Mm.
And I said, the fact that I survived, I said, that isn't as common as, completing the procedure. And I said, you don't have to go through that. In this moment, I realized that God was going to use my story to impact her in the life decisions she was facing. And so that was a Friday. And I said, you know what? I said, before, we go forward, why don't I meet you? I would love to meet you, pick you up. And why don't we go to a pregnancy center that I know of here in town? And we did. We went in together, and she was so sweet to just let me walk that with her. And she chose life. She texted me a few days later and said, I'm keeping my baby. And I thought that was a response that I didn't expect from my story.
It's so incredible to hear. I've had very similar responses, and that's exactly, when I asked you earlier, was there hope in your survivor story? And I think even in the midst of just surviving, in the midst of finding out something that is crazy and heartbreaking, like surviving an abortion, the hope is maybe even something that you can't see yet in the midst of your surviving, in the midst of finding out that your story isn't what you think it is. The hope is that God has that plan, and He has a purpose, and He knew exactly who you were, and that He was calling you to have this story so that He could use you in the lives of others. And so I think you're seeing the hope in your story as you're able to use your story, your voice, your experience, your survival to speak into the lives of others, and to encourage and to walk alongside women and families who find themselves in pregnancy situations, and people who are finding out that they survived abortions. I mean, there's just so many things that you can speak into as a survivor and use your experience, even though you didn't ask for it.
Right.
You can use your experience to impact and to save and to give value to the lives of other people. And so I love hearing those stories of how God does that through people, through women like you, Denisha. So that's super encouraging. You mentioned, though, that you worked at a church. And so I'm just curious, like, as you found out you survived an abortion, how did that affect your role at the church? And was abortion something that your church was talking about, or was abortion something that you had really thought about or had a stance on before you learned that you had survived an abortion? And then how has God used your survival in church ministry to bring conversation and to bring healing and hope?
Yeah, I was a pastor for 10 years at my church and loved it. It was the hardest decision to decide to leave. I actually left April 1st of last year. So when I found out my survivor story, the first thing I did was go to our leadership, and I said, okay, so I found out this and I feel called to share it. And you and I both got to work on a project called Faces of Choice, where we told our testimony and it was put into a commercial and a website. And so I went to my pastors and said, I would love to do this, but I realize as a pastor, I'm also representing our church. Is this okay, that I step into this project? And they gave me full permission. They were like, yes, absolutely. Definitely what you do, with your life outside of church, that's not a problem. Feel free. And I said, it could get controversial. And it did, right, Claire? You and Melissa went to the March for Life. And when you guys unveiled the video and the project for Faces of Choice, which was so amazing, by the way. I sat at home and just cried.
Oh,
The two of you on that stage, I mean, the president walks off, you guys walk on. It was just such a moment as you guys represented survivors all over the world. Oh, it was such a moment. I was sobbing.
wow.
And I mean, I felt like you guys were standing there for all of us, and you unveiled the commercial, which just brought so much awareness to even the fact that there are survivors. So that happened at the March for Life, right? That was a Friday, I believe. And I've kind of compartmentalized my life, right? Like I'm starting to see God putting together my story and how he wants to utilize that. And then over here, I'm a pastor at our church and it's another day, and open up my car door, put my foot down on the pavement, and a woman came up to my car. And she said, Denisha, I saw your video. And all of a sudden, Claire, it was like two worlds collided. And I thought, I don't know what to do in this moment. Like, this was my project over here. Like, and then this is my like real life here. And whoa, it was like an explosion happened. Like, I was like, and I must have looked as shocked. I was like, okay, we're doing this today. Like, this is happening. And she said, thank you so much for sharing. And she said, I want to share with you. She says, I had an abortion and I've never told anybody. And all I could think of in that moment, Claire, was this lady was my mom. My mom passed away when I was 23, and I knew a lot of her secrets, but I never knew this one. And all I could think of is this woman standing before me is my mom. And my mom went 23 years of her life not talking about this, carrying this, raising me, waking up in the morning, taking care of me, looking me in the eye, knowing somewhere inside of her heart what had happened. And so looking at this woman, this compassion came over me. And I thought, I want to work with women that have had abortions. Like, that was such a strong feeling. Like, I just want them to know that they are loved, that Christ forgives and redeems, and that there is hope, that they don't have to carry that with them their whole life the way my mom did. And so all of that, like, that was such a moment, all of those emotions flooded me. And so we talked, and I hugged her, and I walked maybe 20, 30 feet before another woman came up to me and told me her story of experiencing an abortion. And I walked up to the stairs, and within an hour and a half, I talked to 4 women at my church who have experienced a personal abortion. And so that wrecked me. I remember I came home and just cried and just thought, are we talking about this as a church?
So, thinking about our churches, we have Celebrate Recovery, right? If you've struggled with addiction, we have divorce care. If you've struggled with, had a divorce, we have all of these different categories, right? To say there's help for this. But what I wasn't seeing is a lot of help for women who have had abortions. This was my mom. And are we, as we look out on our churches in a Sunday morning, I think sometimes we might believe that doesn't affect our church. That's not something that's in our church. And I just want to say that, 1 out of 4 women have experienced an abortion. And so my heart just leaped at the opportunity to start talking about healing. So much of the topic of abortion has been, politicized, right? It's been something where it's not all churches want to embrace that conversation because of the fact that it is political and it's very divisive. When you look down at it, there are 61 million women and 61 million men in America alone, more than that probably, right, that have experienced an abortion. And so what if we start with healing? And that's really a passion of mine, is what if we start with healing? And there are so many organizations out there that do provide healing after abortions. That is my encouragement for churches, to start with the healing piece and to realize that as we look out over our churches, 1 out of 4 women have experienced an abortion. And so I really felt that particular morning. And so my heart was just so heavy for all of these women that have never shared their story, because it doesn't always fit in church circles to say I've had an abortion. And so just to have the freedom and the healing and experience God just
reclaiming that experience in our lives and providing that freedom and forgiveness is a huge passion of mine. And I know that in churches, it's hard to talk about, because it has become so political. And so I think that there is so much opportunity as churches to provide healing, to come at it through healing, because as women heal from a past abortion, what's going to happen? They're going to let go of that shame. They're going to let go of any guilt or shame they've been carrying. And then at that point, and not everybody experiences that, right? But the majority of women, from what I've found, do have some sort of emotion behind their experience. So what if those men and women, right? Over 61 million in America alone. What if those women and men find healing, find restoration in their story, and then step out to start talking about and using their voice to what abortion really looks like? And what if it's just a friend that calls them and says, hey, I'm pregnant, considering this? Well, let me tell you of my experience. If we take off that shame and we provide that healing, people can begin to talk about what that experience was truly like behind the clinic doors. And I think that if more people who have experienced an abortion are healed and can use their voice to speak to others one-on-one or to crowds, right? That I think that will impact the number of abortions that we see. So I think the church has a huge role and so much opportunity to provide that healing.
That's something I talk about often. And, if you look at our culture today, you'll see that Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry is saying to women and families, we're here for you. I mean, they don't hold that back. People know Planned Parenthood is here. The abortion industry is here. They're ready to, quote unquote, serve us, however you want to say it. That's how they're wording it, right? So that's how the culture's hearing it. And I've wondered so often, especially since I found out that I had survived an abortion, that I had been affected by abortion, something that growing up in the church, I thought that will never be my story, right? Mm-hmm. But I've wondered, why isn't the church saying it even louder? Because if we want women to feel like they can come to the church as their safe place, as the place that where they can find healing and grace and mercy and the love of Christ and community, a community of people who wants to walk alongside them in their grief and difficult circumstances, etc. If that's what we're preaching and saying as the church should be, why isn't the church saying, okay, you're in an unplanned pregnancy, you can come to us. This is the place for you.
Yes.
You've had an abortion. You can come to us. We're going to acknowledge you. We're going to walk alongside you. There is hope and there is healing.
Yes.
What I find is that churches, the majority of churches, are completely silent. And so women don't know they can come to their community of believers, to the church, when they find themselves in these situations. They feel shamed. They feel they need to hide. They need to cover up their sin. So many things. And also, if they have experienced an abortion in their past, they're silently suffering in the pews of our churches. Yes. Because nobody is saying anything. Yes. And so what are you doing with your ministry that is helping churches or helping leaders that you come in contact with be equipped to have the right wording, to know how to serve in their specific community, in their specific church? How are you starting that conversation or helping others? Or if you're not, what is the church's role? Where can they begin? Is there a landing place for them that if they want to equip themselves, that they can?
I think that sometimes we can get excited about something and then we want to stand up and make a huge stance, right, for life and against abortion. I would say do it gently, knowing that 1 out of 4 women in your congregation have probably experienced abortion. And so I think a great place to start is with healing and acknowledging the women who are sitting in there, instead of trying to maybe influence out of the gate, for people to be pro-life. I think that caring and loving and nurturing the the women in your church that have experienced it, the families in your church that have been impacted by abortion, whether it's a sibling that's been lost or a family member who's made the decision, and there's so many people, the ripple effect to this is huge. So I would encourage leaders to start with healing. There's all sorts of different healing programs out there. And so being able to just provide that space for healing is going to open up that conversation in beautiful ways and give you the opportunity to educate and equip your congregation to stand for life.
I just want to add to that Embrace Grace would be a great organization.
Yes, that's another one.
Mm-hmm. I would encourage anyone who is, goes to a church and you don't hear your pastor talk about this, or maybe you work at a church, maybe you're a pastor listening today, equip yourself and your church members to embrace life and to embrace all of these different circumstances people experience in relation to abortion in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. There's one last question I wanted to ask you before you share about your ministry and how listeners can follow you. I have to imagine, just because I do have abortion survivors reach out to me right now on just about a weekly basis. I hear from one or two people who have heard my story or followed my Facebook page or heard through word of mouth that they're not alone, that there are other abortion survivors out there. And I'm sure that you have had similar experience as abortion survivors reach out to you. The more you share your story and put yourself out there and serve others. So what would you say to the person who just found out that they survived an abortion?
I would say you're not alone. I felt like I found a family when I found the Abortion Survivors Network. There are people to walk with you through the shock of finding out your story and also the healing that follows. I lead the healing program for the Abortion Survivors Network, and we have biweekly groups. We have monthly meetings to just walk through that healing process with you. Take that step of faith and step out and reach out to another survivor. And Claire, you have your book Survivor coming out. And I think that is going to be just such an encouragement to not only, if you are a survivor, to know that you're not alone, but also to just the world to hear your story from the perspective of a survivor. So I would just say you're not alone, and you have a whole tribe, a whole family that would love to come alongside you.
You are exactly right. I wish that when I found out that I survived an abortion, that I knew other people and that I had a community and that people asked me the questions that we as survivors need to be asked. Like, are you okay? How are you processing this? What does it mean that I survived an abortion? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for our culture? Oftentimes abortion survivors do feel rejected. They feel alone. They feel like they're an outcast in society because society doesn't want to acknowledge that we exist. And so if you are a survivor, I would also encourage you to reach out and experience what God wants you to experience through the healing in your journey and through the hope in your journey, as we've discussed today. Denisha, it's been so fun to talk with you. I feel like we could just go on and on and on and make this like a 2-part series, and maybe I'll have to have you back to continue on, because I know people have just so enjoyed hearing from you today. I'd love to give people an opportunity to just hear a little bit about Reclaimed Story, maybe how they could be involved in that and how they can follow up with you after today if they have questions or if they're interested in being a part of Reclaimed Story, the Abortion Survivors Network, and all that you're doing.
Absolutely. What we've found is that women need hope and healing, and there comes a part in our lives where we might have a file cabinet that is so neatly stacked with all of our files in life and all of our experiences. And then there's those files that are sitting on top of our desk and they don't fit in. It's the stories of trauma. It's stories of abuse. It's stories of neglect. And those experiences is what Reclaim Story is there for, to provide a safe community for people to come alongside you, to know that you aren't alone. And that actually, the community piece came out of what I've experienced with the Abortion Survivors Network. We want to encourage you to find hope and healing through a vibrant life with Christ. And that is our passion. So we also have a podcast, Living the Reclaimed Life. You can find us on all the podcast outlets. And our website is reclaimedstory.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Denisha, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. This wraps up our mini-series, Meet Survivors. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed hearing from other abortion survivors and their stories and their wisdom. I know that I learned so much just through their willingness to share with us.
Thanks for listening. I pray you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of our growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is a huge help in helping us reach more people to live the reclaimed life. Thank you so much for listening.